warm startup friend welcome for our speaker tonight, Joe Edgar. Thanks, Joe, for being with us tonight. We want to learn more about you, so can you tell us about your background, your family, and where you grew up?
Where I grew up? Yes, I can tell you a bit about that. I am originally from Chiloquin, Oregon. So oddly tonight there's a gentleman here with me who grew up on the reservation as well. So that's home to the Modoc and Klamath Indian, and if you're from there you know why that's a controversy to use both those tribes in the same sentence. But yeah, I grew up there, one of 13 children. So a very large family. I'm somewhere squeezed in the lower middle of that group. But yeah, large family. I guess that's where I'm from.
Awesome. So did you have an entrepreneurial family?
You know, I did. Both of my parents were lifestyle entrepreneurs. To know the difference, it's to grow up in a town like Chiloquin, it's very poor. I think my father retired making something like $26,000 a year. So we had a garden, we had lots of things, but growing up in a poor reservation town, I don't really associate with the word entrepreneur at all. So we definitely did not have French class anywhere. But we would call it hustling. So my first business was definitely illegal. I was about 12. But Tony knows exactly what I'm talking about. But you know, you kind of go out. That's what the town is. I mean, it's very poor. You just hustle. You're trying to find how to survive, and so that's definitely the mentality I would say I took out of it was hustle. But yeah, both my parents. My father swung a hammer, so he was a carpenter. So I grew up most of the time as a labor force. When you have 13 kids, that's called labor. So we were the construction crew, starting up cleaning up boards to building up. My mother was a janitor, so we would spend our weekends helping her clean churches, and so yeah,
Wow.
definitely entrepreneurs. And so yeah, you took that spirit, but you kept that in mind. In fact, one thing I will say, I've never carried a hammer pouch. It was almost a mentality that I'm getting out of this. And so to the frustration of all of my brothers who constantly had to carry all my tools. But yeah, definitely, I mean, that mentality of entrepreneurism was definitely alive and well in Chiloquin. So.
Gotcha. So what brought you to Austin?
So in Chiloquin, I guess I'll go back to Chiloquin. I was about 12, and my father was trying to get ahead, and he had been buying all these houses, and he is an amazing man, great heart, but a terrible businessman. And this was pretty apparent to me when I was 12 doing this. And so watching and observing how things were working, I bought my first house when I was 13. I'd saved up some money mowing lawns, about $3,000, and I put this down payment down and put it under my parents' house on the reservation. So houses in that town you could buy for about $10,000 to give a perspective. So my first one was about that. I had spent the next 60 days fixing this house up. And that was nights, weekends. I had taken out of the local hardware store what became about a $10,000 line. They didn't intend for it to be that, but we just kept drawing on it. And I remember every week they'd come and say, "Whoa, what's the plan?" And I'd have to convince them, almost like you would say a startup to the VCs. I need another round. I need another round. And so they would extend me some more pipes or some insulation. And so I got this house fixed up. We sold it. And I ended up buying some more. I ended up dropping out of high school, so I've only been to, I think, the 9th grade. Actually, don't recall, but it's 8th or 9th grade in there. And started going to college at a local town, which is OIT, and started learning C++ programming, doing some mathematics, and basically buying and selling these houses on the side, fixing them up to kind of pay for it. And by the time 2005 came around, I was sitting on about $10 million in real estate. Wow. And so kind of taking this real estate, and Wells Fargo had issued me a pretty large loan. And if you're familiar with what was going on in 2005, to give you an example, I built a house in 2002, and every 2 years I would build it and then sell it because you can get a primary tax exemption, a large tax benefit. And when I originally built that thing for like 120, sold it for about 250. 2 years later, it sold for about 350. 2 years later, that same house sold for about 600,000. So that's how fast values were going up, especially in the Oregon area. So I had gotten it, this is my first taste of what the venture investing world was. We had this loan, I started lending it to these small entrepreneurs who were buying houses and fixing them up. I knew that space, I had this excess, and we'd buy these properties, and people would almost offer as much as we just bought them, plus the fix-up costs, we hadn't done anything to them, so it was mind-blowing. So we had stopped basically selling anything. We had now created a property management company, we built some software for it, and then in addition, we had started developing land. And so we started 3 companies that were now kind of growing, and I was trying to do my bachelor's. So I was heavy deep into, I've always wanted to get an education, it's just been a long process, I've had to pay for it myself, unfortunately, and so, you know, cranking that out in the mix of all those was important. But in these entrepreneurs, I found that I think the one that actually hit was a bean farm. I'd loaned money to a bean farm. The guy originally did a real estate deal, and then he opened my eyes to new things. I was like, a bean farm? I don't know anything about farming. So I'd gotten into a bean farm. I won't talk about all the losses. I have many, many losses. Let's not make that scar night. But I got into this bean farm, and it did really well. And I was a bit disappointed that I only got back my interest. And so I started looking up, like, there's got to be a way to, like, how do I loan money, get some of the company? And so it's the first time I ever saw the word venture capital. And so I started playing the space and learning about this thing called angel investors. And I was like, angel investors? That's the stupidest name I've ever heard. And from there, I started getting in and finding out about a lot of businesses. And so I think my first true startup, as you would think about it, was water purification. I did that in Oregon. So I started getting into those kind of angel earlier deals and just kind of floating around. Most of them ended up doing nothing, but great learning experience. So I continued my education there.
So there were some that were successful?
Yes, we've had quite a few. So from there, it brought me to, I ended up doing this undergrad study. I was real focused. I mean, I think when you're a little older, and I was a little older in my class, I was probably, 26, 27 by the time I graduated. And there had been a small stint. We started a company in Brazil. My brother had served a mission there, and so it taken me to Brazil. And then I ended up serving a mission in Australia, so I lived with the Aboriginal people for about 2 years, and so there was a small volunteer stint. And so coming back and finishing up the Brazil company and trying to clean out a few things interests me in finding out, all right, where is real estate going? Because here we were sitting on top of all this real estate, and prices were going up so high, but developers started filling the houses with things like washers, dryers, beds, and I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're trying to maintain price, yet we're adding more, that's a price decrease. And so the more we started researching and following it, it's like, I gotta get out of this. I was like, and Oregon had skyrocketed as far as values, and there really wasn't an economy to support such high prices. And so in real estate, there's what's called a 1031 exchange. And so we had predicted 3 cities that would make it through a real estate recession. And Austin was one of them, so my wife and I went through these 3 cities, and luckily she picked Austin. And so we had come here, and I had the ambition, I wanted to do grad school, I wanted to become an economist, and so I wanted to go to UT. And I also wanted to get into the Dallas Federal Reserve. I want to make, big influence as far as the Dallas Reserve. Well, UT did not accept me, so my life is a whole life of failures. But I ended up doing a second bachelor. I didn't finish the bachelor's in mathematics at UT for the first year. And in that first year, I was like, well, Dallas is too far away to really get into the Federal Reserve. How can I do it? As you find my story, anything I get into, I do think there's a value to how much money you want. So when I enter something, I don't expect to make any money on it. I'm totally in it for the interest. And so I had found, I think everything I applied for, I got rejected, except for a internship at the governor's office. And so I was like, all right. So I'd been here like 6 months. And I did this internship at the governor's office. And they had this little pet project, and one of their funds that had just gone through LIBOR and was shutting down. I was like, well, y'all are looking at it wrong. So I just did a bunch of analysis and showed them how not only could they keep it alive, but they can make a lot of money. And from there, about 6 months later, fast forwarding, I ran 2 of those funds. And then pretty soon I was running most of those funds. And so most don't know, but the governor's office at that time had about $500 million in funds. And so, or actually they have about $1 billion, but I ended up running about $500 million of that. Wow. And so those are made up in 5 major funds, all focused on entrepreneurs. And so there's early stage, and that is not the now deceased emerging technology fund. So I made sure to kind of caveat that one separate, but that was kind of the involvement. But that's my original take and how I got to Austin.
great story. So when you landed here, tell me about like your startups, and did you do real estate here?
So I did transfer through this 10 to the 31 exchange. I spent the first year, I was trying to go to school at UT. I was trying to figure out, I was trying to get into grad school. I was studying a lot for GRE, and I was trying to trade all this real estate in. I still had 2 companies operating in Oregon that I was trying to manage from here, and that was in 2007. As we all know what happened in 2008, I actually, fared pretty well. I still got left with a few things there, so as you can see, my real estate portfolio is spread around amongst a number of states now. But yeah, we transferred that down. So coming down here, I didn't want to get into real estate, but it was a great time for it to crash. Because when it did, it was in the middle of the transfer. I'm like, well, what do I do now? And that's what really brought me into saying, well, I could either get into the Federal Reserve, which is too far away, or I can find something here that may get me there. And so that's what really brought me looking for it. And I do think I've now been in numerous presidential politics. So full disclosure, I know Gary Johnson very well. I know Governor Perry. They both, I like it. So I do get heavy into politics. I think it's part of growing up on a reservation where you are a minority amongst minorities. Like, I didn't know white was predominant until I was about 14. So I was referred to as white boy most of my life, and that's just how it was. You know exactly what it's like. So you're getting a lot of fights for that. But I think that's kind of a libertarian mentality of sorts. So I've always thought that hustle is really the secret. So I wanted to get into government, not to be a bureaucrat, but to say, I think there's lots of ways, we need government. We just need efficient people to kind of run some things. So I've always tried to get involved and learn as much as I can. I'm actually as you can imagine, a very dumb person. And so I try to be the dumbest person in the room. And when I'm getting into something like that, I do take it from that standpoint. Like, I have no idea how this works, and I try to figure it out. And so yeah, I've wanted to get involved in that and be part of that. So I have no idea what your original question was.
So you spent some time in government. During that time, how active were you involved? Did you have any startups going at the same time?
So, yeah, that is a great question, because that explains a couple of things later on in the story. When you're with the state, you have these major conflicts of interest. And part of it with the governor's office, it was a lot of fun, because we really got to develop some great things that I get to see now come out of it. But part of it, with the fund that they particularly had, it was popular, everyone knew about it, and I did think that Texas was going about it the wrong way, especially like looking into the data. In 2000, Texas was the #2 place for startups to get capital. Then we hit 2008, and I don't know if you all know this, but we're about to drop down to like number 10. This year we could end up being number 10. We were number 4, but this will be the first year. Now there's a couple of things, we'll see how this last quarter kind of pans out, but to drop from number 4 is a major thing. New York has really been pushing, so most of our net goes to New York and Silicon Valley since 2008. So there's a lot of things that had to change. And so I wanted to do something with the funds that we ran. And there's so many restrictions. I mean, you have boards of directors, you have politics. There's a lot of voters that think they, are sold different stories. And even though those stories aren't true, there are some that might be true. But you're trying to balance all of those things, and it's really actually hard to get a lot of things done. And so it does require a lot of hustle. But we had come up with a theory to basically say, what we do need is more funds. We need a lot more venture. And so I coincidentally landed on a great opportunity in 2000. All the dates blend together. I think it was 2012. We had hit this recession. In 2010, they started what's called the state small business credit initiative. Came out of the White House. So U.S. Treasury came with $1.5 billion and dispersed among the states. Texas ended up with about $50 million. And they basically called up and said, hey, we're gonna give you $50 million, spend it, and then we'll tell you the rules on how to use it. It's for small businesses. They really had no idea how to do it. And so it was perfect, because I had just written a thesis on what we need to do in deploying capital. So I got another opportunity to basically leave the governor's office, and I can explain not on camera why some of that happened, but I ended up joining the Department of Agriculture. out of all places, and the U.S. Treasury. And so I ran what is now called the J4T Fund. I'm not going to mention any of the funds because that's really the initiative. It was to become a fund of funds, help to form new funds, but not to have the state play an actor's role. And part of the state playing an actor's role is when a state comes into a startup and makes an investment, they are the dumbest money. Like, you could not ask for worse money, because they're going to come in, they're going to invest in you, they're going to try to give you some kind of dictation, of which means nothing, and the people who are in it have never done it before. It's a lot of bureaucracy, and so you're torn in directions you shouldn't go. The worst thing is they're going to give you a valuation you don't deserve, so then you're automatically doomed for a down round. And so it makes for a terrible environment. Whereas if we were to employ actual professional venture capitalists and help them raise a fund, well, their job is to oversee you, right? So venture capitalist has basically three problems. One, they're servicing the deal, right, after they make a deal. But then there's the decision making, right? And then there's deal flow. And so the state found that it's really good at deal flow, and they just loved the buzz. So they got addicted to deal flow, right? But then decision making became a bit of a problem. There were lots of conflicts of interest, and servicing the deal did not exist. When they actually got a bill for what it would cost to service it, it was going to be like $8 million a year, and the legislature just panicked. They didn't know what to do. So they're the worst place to have this kind of housed. And so what we did is a lot of the venture funds you now know of came out of this effort. And so you'll see lots of them have raised millions of dollars. In fact, I think there's some great news about the venture space we can talk about later, kind of the industry. But that is kind of the basis for Texas. And especially if you look at where it's gone now, I mean, it would be a really barren place. Because right now there isn't the amount of deal flow that's coming out of Texas, we really do not have the amount of A and C capital that are available here in Texas. B really will get on a plane. So if you're raising a B round, I mean, they don't care where you're located. But your C and A are important to be geographical because they end up requiring you to get there. And so building that out and kind of helping those venture circles kind of get established. And those are both angel funds. So we try to prove that we can do it for an angel fund, the same we can do it for traditional. So we did all spectrums all across the state. So there's a number of funds, and they all now are growing and thriving. That fund kind of dried up, and we'll see. I think there's going to be another initiative that has kind of sparked many ideas, and so the state legislature is both thinking of doing something along their lines, so we're talking with them. And then the federal government, the U.S. Treasury, is also thinking of doing another $100 million. Now, you've probably heard me just say a conundrum, because I also said I'm libertarian, then here I am talking about how to use state dollars. So I think there's a balance. I've definitely become very knowledgeable about the venture capital formation space. There are lots of firms that you would probably think of as a venture capital fund, and I would not. I think if your main LP is the government, you are not a traditional venture fund. You're an obligation. I can tell you about some funds that I've tried to kill programs. I do think they're wasteful on the taxpayer. I don't think they're efficient. I don't think they're effective, and I've tried to kill them. J4T was specifically saying zero management fee, extended carry, really focused on entrepreneurs. I mean, the state's only going to get a cost if you cannot deliver. And so it's a very focused fund. But yeah, we did that for, 2.5 years. And then you're stuck with U.S. Treasury, you're stuck with Department of Agriculture, the governor's office, and you can't do this is a long story to get to your answer, but you can't create anything. And it's hard for someone who likes to create things not to create something. But you have to find ways. That's what it's all about, is getting inside of government to show them how to be entrepreneurs. So what I created were things inside of government, but they weren't for my own profit. To be honest, I lost a lot of money being with the government, right? I think at one time my salary was like $36,000 a year. So there was a lot of efforts, but it's about the ambition to grow something that's bigger than I think us all. But coming out of that, then it was a lot of pent up demand, so I wanted to create a couple of things. So I now have a startup. We just raised some money. Tenant Cloud, we started a nonprofit, Texas Pace Authority, which it'll be the largest push to clean energy in Texas. So it's now in Austin, Dallas, Houston, El Paso, about to be in a few other places. It's very robust. It'll probably end up being a $50 billion industry, where buildings can actually use financing to, it's like a property tax on a property to pay for all of it, but the savings end up paying for itself. And so if you really look at the demand of energy, centralized power is a terrible model, and we as taxpayers are subsidizing power plants. And so this can offset that. I mean, that's a sad short pitch for it. But yeah, I started creating lots of things as soon as I got out of there and getting excited. Tenant Cloud, I'll just pitch it because I think we should land on it, is free property management software. So different than most founders, I think I took a different perspective on how to start a company. And so most founders have an idea, they build this, they get a founder. I guess I had seen too many deals, so I said, well, I don't want to start from scratch. And so I had looked into space, and I'm like, man, there's nothing there. If you have just one rental, then you have really no solution. If you have 15, 25, 50 rentals, you have no solution unless you want to pay a fortune. And so I knew that space is different, that apartments and property managers are different than single-family homes and landlords. In fact, the tenants of those are different. And believe it or not, single-family homes, do-it-yourself renters make up 60% of the market. There's 18 million of them, and they oversee 30 million rentals, and they have an expenditures of around $60 billion a year. So I don't want to collect their rent. I want to facilitate those expenses. So I want to give them free property management software, give tenants free property management software so they can have a resume, they can engage, they can pay rent, they can submit maintenance requests. And then by giving it all to them free, I sell things like renter's insurance, home warranty policies, home warranty insurance. I can refinance your house. You can get a maintenance request. If something's broken right there, you can find somebody to fix it, and those people pay us on the back end. So we charge companies basically a marketing. It's basically the oldest company ever to exist, right? It's a marketing company. It's a consumer model. But when I started this, I was like, well, here's the idea. We got to do it. What's in the space? So I went looking through Austin, and I actually found one here in Capital Factory. And so I should also say, I mean, I was still doing lots of angel deals. Any angel I did while I was with the state, I made sure it had no technology. So I'm in Boomerang Pies. I was the first investor in that one. I've got a couple of food. I mean, just things that the state would never touch, I got involved in. But then in the tech space, I had found one here that I was like, this is perfect. I want to find a company that couldn't quite get to market, but would take a big check and probably get a surprise, and we're going to change everything. And so we started, it would be a sad to a founder. It's like, I love your product. How would you like to rename it and redo everything? You know, it's like exactly. But we ended up working with him, and then about a week into it, like his phone is ringing. His product was selling, and I'm like, forget it. So I wrote him $100,000, and I said, you got a company, go do it. And that left me on a road trip. So I had looked through everyone who's trying to do it. I made about 32 companies. I tested out all their software. I found the space and where they were. And I had narrowed it down to about 3 that I really wanted. And so, and here I am, just an investor, sort of around the country. And the first one had just raised $5 million, and they were very pompous. They're now a competitor of ours. One in Florida is no longer with us. In fact, the founder has now moved and is running a company here in Austin that's doing great, whole different space. And then there was one in Chicago, and I had run into, and as you can imagine, I just cold called, said, hey, I'm interested in investing in your company, I want to learn out more. And this just happens to be 2 immigrants from Ukraine. They've been in Chicago about 2 years, great. Actually, I've fallen in love with Ukrainian people. I've learned a lot about it. They are hardworking, and the Berlin Wall fell, and it's just amazing culture. They are hardworking. These are your real hustlers. But when I met with them, I mean, it was an interesting conversation because I was sitting across, and they have very thick Ukrainian accents, and one of them would not talk to me, and he was just like, you know, and here I am thinking like, did I just find myself in like the Russian mafia, or like, what am I about to pitch? I'm about to tell these people I have money. It's like, this is not a good fit. So I did kind of worry about that, but as we got into it, we got to know each other. I flew up there immediately, got a long talk with them. They got the vision. They had a large Chicago investor that had gotten involved with them earlier on. And we started, and that company's name was Eva Properties, which, as I see lots of founders, I mean, Eva Properties was the first 3 initials of his kid's property. And as you can imagine, that's the name. So I was like, well, we're going to change the name. And then there were a few other things. And so I said, I'm a drop-in CEO, but we're going to give you lots of money, and we're going to do a whole new vision. And they were really into it. And what's great is he kind of had the same overall vision, but his original investor really did not understand startups. And that's an important thing when you go to raise money, is someone really just have to understand the ecosystem of both startups and the industry that you're in, or there's a big disconnect for the company, and it's hindering on it. So you have to know what you're getting into. But we've taken that, so we did a full product launch in October of 2015. We're now at about 30,000 users, so we're almost a year old. We manage about 100,000 properties. And it's taken off, and in almost a year's time, we hit reviews.com, put us as the 3rd top property management software out of 52, and that's billion-dollar companies being compared to. And then Capterra put us as one of the 3 top property management softwares. Unfortunately, our competitor made on that list, but and when I say a competitor, it is an interesting space. Now, Reviews put us on all property management software, which isn't really fair, but we love that because that blew us away. That was a shock. Really, there's a difference between property management software and landlord software, because property management software is SaaS. It's a company. They're managing people. The apartments, the people are all on site. It's a whole different product. It's a whole different business. When you're a single-family rental with the landlord, it's logistics. You have properties all over the place. You are busy. You don't want to keep track of this. It has to be doing it itself. And so it's a whole different product. So to make it on some of those lists were quite impressive. And so we found, I mean, the demand for it is substantial. One thing that's unique about it, worth mentioning, is Tenant Cloud is a consumer model. And so I knew the plight that we were going to have in trying to raise money in Texas. Someone recently told me, it's like, wow, I looked into you, and it's not really fair that you raise money out of angels. And I was like, that is an unfortunate comment. Because one, whenever an entrepreneur, anybody who's been an entrepreneur tries to raise money, as soon as you do that, you are subject to whatever. I mean, there's no special gimmicks, right? I will also say I've been a member of CTAN almost since its start, and I've been very active in most of all the ecosystems. And if I were to make a list, and I've seen this many times, if you were to write down right now, if you're raising money, take a list and write like the top 10 people you're like, oh, they would at least give me something. They would give me something, right? And then throw it away and don't even talk to them, because chances are they're not. So our investors, I've never met them before. We have the most amazing investors from all different walks, and I've never met them before. So we only have one investor that knew me before he invested, and he was one of our smallest investors. He's a VC at a Silicon Valley, so unrelated. I'm a Kauffman Fellow, and so he was part of the Kauffman Fellows group, which is a whole other club. But yeah, it's an interesting perspective. We went around to all the 5 major angel networks. We made it through all of their screening processes. And the biggest effort was to educate them on what a consumer company is. It means you can't hold us accountable to having revenue right now. It's going to be a scale. And so most angels, and as a member of CTAN, I know them well, they probably had the most process. And so I do have some different takes, and I mean, I know you have questions, so if you're interested, we can handle this more. But there is a different take on each one of these angel networks that is important to know as you're going around. If anybody's raising funds, there's like some certain ways I think you can hack the system in the environment. And me taking it from, because I play in a unique role that most don't, right? I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a VC, and I've been an LP, which is where VCs go to get money. And so playing in all 3 roles is a unique way to see the environment, that you do have to time things right, you do have to think about how you approach things. But to pull off a consumer model in the environment we just did was a lot harder than I thought it was. So we had almost 75 investor meetings, ended up with about 5 investors. So that took about 9 months.
And you just went through this. So I met Joe at the Collision Conference in New Orleans in April.
Yeah, that's a great one, because
Yeah.
we made it to number 2. Number 2 company out of like 1,500 or 2,500 that investors wanted to meet. And guess how many of them invested in us?
How many?
0. 0, not
The
1.
place was flooded.
It was
with
flooded. It was
investors.
flooded. We were number 2 that they wanted to meet with, but not a single investor. So.
Wow.
It just, and I didn't even count all those meetings, so,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, so since then you went out raising money, and so you met with 75.
Yeah, I mean, basically we went through the calendar, and I'm trying to count how many meetings I've done, and
Wow.
it's about 75, and oddly enough too, the investors that came in, I really didn't meet with them before they committed. So, I mean, that's why I say most of the time what you're looking for isn't important, but it is important that I was out on the market actively doing it. So those conversations could come up in those environments. But most of the people and most avenues that you're looking for, and it is again a consumer model, so it's a hard one for most investors to know about. But yeah, it was not the easiest. In fact, thinking through it now, because I intentionally did not go to any of the VCs because I have a problem that most don't. I'm trying to show that there is no conflicts of interest. So on our first round, I have to have a third-party validate valuation. I can't go to a LP that I just helped them raise $120 million and then you say, hey, fund my startup. It looks really bad.
Sure.
So we really intentionally went out trying to help, one, educate the angel environment, but two, try to prove valuation. So I think backing up, like, it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And part of that were the overall macro factors. But
yeah, I would have thought with your connections, like, you would have had to call a few people and it would have been done.
I mean, I wish life was that easy. When you're standing across from somebody writing a check, I mean, they could think of anything of you, but now all of a sudden they're having to put money into you, and it's a whole different game. So as a member of C10, I know these people, and it is a great group. Guess how many C10 investors I have? Not one. For my own group that I've been with like for 8 years, not one invested, which to me, actually, it ended up being a really good thing. But yeah, it's tough. Your closest friends, I mean, friends and family rounds are a little different when you're coming out for your seed round. It's you're asking a bit more people.
So 2 questions for you. 2 things I want to make sure we cover. And
I should say that I invested. I am from C10, so I guess we got one.
Oh, we got one. There you go. 2 things I want to cover. What advice can you give to anybody who has maybe a company at any stage and they're looking to raise money?
Yeah. So I mean, when you I've done this all around. First, you have to think about valuation, and I'll talk about this pretty bold. There are some macro things going on in the ecosystem. I'll just put these out so we all have the same information. LPs dictate everything, but lagged a few years. LPs are the large insurance companies. They're going to put money into venture capitalists, right? And they were not impressed in the middle of 2004. They definitely were not impressed in 2008. So, but we know, I mean, that was to be expected. I mean, the expected return was less than 50% of what they wanted, and so they started pulling back. That was the first thing to get plugged. Well, in third quarter of 2014, we saw returns go through the roof. We saw so many exits, unbelievable, most of them by the largest 10 tech companies, but exits just shot through the roof. All of a sudden the LPs are like, well, we might be reinterested. But what had happened in that time, though, from 2008, is all these VCs had, we had Facebook come out of 2008, we had Twitter, all these other companies have some big exits, so there was interest, but a lot of the VCs had a conundrum. So many VCs are not gonna like that I'm talking about this, but this is the truth. So a venture capitalist is much like a startup, right? So when you're a startup, you're like going through everything. When you go to fundraise, you have to like build pretty charts that makes it look really good, right? Well, VCs sort of have a little advantage that startups don't, because VCs get to write the money, right? And so it's strange that they get to write the money, of which also values their portfolio. So let's imagine you and I decide we're venture capitalists, and we find this company, and we're like, hey, this is a pretty good company, let's both invest, I'll syndicate with you, we'll do it. Like, okay, we got this early one. Well, a year later, we're like, hey, guess what? I need to go raise some more capital, because my capital only lasts me about 2 years, and then I have to go raise another fund. Even though the life of the horizon of that fund is 10 years, I'm only deploying about 2 years of capital. The rest of it's reserved to help that company keep going, or my portfolio. So then we go to say, hey, we're both raising money. This company we invest in, it's maybe 10 million, but I'm starting to think it's $1 billion company. What do you think? And you're like, yeah, I think so. So we both say, you know what, founder, you're $1 billion company. Of course, the founder's like, I am? He's pulling straw out of his mouth, like, oh, Binar. And so all of a sudden, he's got $1 billion company. And we have just tricked the market into thinking that our unrealized value in our fund is amazing. And so we have both just effectively raised fund 2. Because if you were to look at the realized value of what our fund performance is it not just knocking it out of the park? Did we not just find the next unicorns? And so you saw this valuation. First there was like this term unicorn, which I kind of like because my daughter likes unicorns. But you have unicorns kind of going up, but then all of a sudden what happens in 2014? We're just like the unicorns coming from everywhere. And this has actually been a very bad thing for Austin, because Austin, we had Austin Ventures that kind of dissolved. We have a number of internal kind of organic grown VCs right out of Austin trying to raise a fund, and they're having to go up against this. And so here they are trying to show real effective growth, but then they're going up against like, major billion-dollar unrealized value. Unrealized value means it's not cash on cash. Cash on cash means you actually made money. Unrealized means it's unrealized, right? Just floating out there. Yeah, it's $1 billion. And then what happens soon after we give them $1 billion? We raise our new fund, and we don't mind saying, oh, we're gonna have to do a markdown. Sorry about that. So we do a markdown. And that's what happens. Our LPs in that fund get a markdown, and then you saw it kind of in 2014 when all Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, all these insurance companies started basically taking haircuts. Like, what is going on out here? Slicing things in half and 3/4. And then it didn't help that we had a few companies go public. It started, early 2015, I think it was a Box came out, very disappointing exit. We had Square, we had Apogee, all very disappointing. The star was like Fitbit, a consumer product that was kind of leading in the tech space. That was a big one. And we had one more exit towards the end of the year that kind of excited people. But overall, there wasn't a lot of things going on inside that market. So if you look at the swings of capital, everybody withdrew, because now they had to either double down on their bets or write it out. So all of a sudden the B rounds, if you look over the last 8 months, all the B companies have had substantial amount of capital put into them, but seed and A, 30% drop, and most of it's been in seed. So all these venture capitalists have really not been investing in true startups in the last 18 months. They've all been in very big companies. They've been playing private equity.
That's interesting.
And so you have to watch those spaces, because now what happened out of 2015, so the median exit in 2015 was about 50 million. I was just telling someone back here. Guess what it is in 2016? 100 million. So all of a sudden, what has happened? Exits are actually showing to be valuable. And so guess what LPs are doing? I need to get in your fund, because they're real. Those are cash on cash returns. Those aren't unrealized values. Real values are coming out, and most of them, 70% of them are coming from acquisition. And so they're realized values. So the venture world's actually pulling this off by 80%. And so now the LPs are like trying to pump money in these VCs, and these VCs now just raised, to date, it's been 34, 32 billion. So they're probably gonna hit another record for raising since 2008, which means a lot of VCs haven't been writing early stage checks. They're now flush with cash. And guess what? All those startups over the last 18 months, you either raised money or you didn't. And so let's say there's 5, 10 companies in your space, and 5 of those are now out of business. What does that say for the other 5? So if you're raising money right now, the reason I say this is that gives you perspective to what's going on in the industry. We did have something happen about 5 years ago where it used to be that a seed round was about $250,000, and then A round was about $1 million to $2 million, and then you saw something similar we can talk about a different time, but a huge jump. So all of a sudden seed was like $1 million to $2 million. I was like, what? Seed is, and A was like 5 million, and B is like 20. I mean, everything just kind of moved up a section. I didn't quite understand that, but we were about to see something similar. So if you went to Austin, the standard valuation was you could very easily put it on 4 pillars, and you could price yourself at about $4 million. And that is if you had a qualified team, you had a decent product, you were going into a decent market, and I forgot my 4th pillar. Your good market. Your good market. If you could hit all those, you could easily claim a $4 million valuation. If you went under, most people wouldn't take you as real, because they're like, he doesn't really understand where he's pricing. If you went over, you really had to pass the scratch test. And so it was like, all right, well, we really want to see something. And it's Texas. So this is a SaaS town. They do a lot of enterprise, not consumer. And so you had to be, this is where they really, if you were trying to get over 4, you really had to start proving revenue numbers, that you were selling B2B companies and trying to do that. Well, if you're raising money right now in the next 18 months, it's going to be unique, because here I am prognosticating at this point though. But most of those companies that are left get to claim a higher valuation. So that's the fact. If you were able to make it through this last section, or if you're even starting right now, you get credit for making it through. And you're going to be able to see a little higher valuations. You're going to see that terms are going to get interesting. We went through, the last 18 months have been terrible terms, especially on the B rounds. I mean, we've never seen liquidation preferences like that before. It's almost a hard money loans is what they were giving out. And so we're going to see entrepreneurs starting to do this. So it's, if you're raising money, 1, Think through it, definitely reach out. There's a number of people to talk to kind of look at those terms to see, are they in your favor? Don't just take whatever somebody else raised 18 months ago and say, that's how I should mimic myself. So you're gonna be able to find where valuation's a little more, I think you're gonna be able to find where cash is a little more available. But there's a balance to that, because we're in Texas. Texas still has a lot of valuation, but as I just mentioned, compared to Silicon Valley, which, before 2008, Silicon Valley made up 42%, now it's over 50%. New York was 3%, now it's almost 10%. And so you're seeing, unfortunately the two coasts have really taken over the funding. And so it's tough in the sense that, don't totally write it out that you might want to get on an airplane depending on what you're funding. But your story is definitely important. But if you're talking to any investor, especially on an early round, you're trying to weasel two things out of any investor. And I think the one mistake most people have when they talk to investors, they ask them for money. If an investor wants to give you money, they will give you money. Really, you're just trying to find out from them. One, are they a lead investor or are they a co-investor? And if you spend a lot of time on a co-investor, it's wasted time. And here's the difference. Let's say that in this room, all of us are co-investors and there's one lead investor. You're the lead investor, right? Well, if I spend all my time talking to you, all of you have the same question. Well, are they in? Like, have you built up a critical mass? So I'm gonna spend all my time talking to you to find out that none of you are gonna write me a check. It's like, well, Tony's not in, Amber's not in. It's like, well, they all keep giving me excitement buzz, but they never give me a check, right? I'm like, what? And then I talk to you and you basically don't care what anyone else does. You're like, hey, I really like this. I'm gonna totally take a risk on you. But then if I were to then go back and talk to you all and tell you, hey, guess what? Kimberly just wrote me $10,000. Next thing I know, all of you have written me checks. And so you do have to understand how, all of those players are important. Everybody's important. But you do have to understand why each investor is important and make sure to put them in the right bucket so you're spending your time effectively, because as entrepreneurs know, there's not a lot of time. Time is money. So when you're going around to meetings, when you're meeting with someone, it's really important to get face-to-face. Like pitches are great, people get a thing, but there's not really a lot. They're not effective, right? You're not getting a lot of a pitch. You do have to do it. The whole point of giving the pitch is so right after it, you can meet as many people as possible. Get every business card you can, find them on LinkedIn. The one thing I will say about C10 is they are an amazing group. They will cold call anybody. You can reach out to them blindly. They want to hear your story. They want to hear, whatever it is, so reach out to them. But you're trying to find out from that investor and put it in the bucket. Are you a co-investor? And it's pretty easy to dictate, I shouldn't say dictate, it's pretty easy to grasp which bucket they're in because you can ask them about previous deals. A lead investor will tell you exactly why he invested in their last deal. Like exactly. A co-investor will probably end up telling you that they did it, well, C10 was like doing this round or this group was doing a round, and so they just kind of got in because everybody was. So it's pretty easy to separate those out. But if you're trying to raise money, especially in Austin and around Texas, I would say the ecosystem is amazing. Because if you get funding, these people are dedicated to you, but it's a little harder to get funding. But if you go out seeking for those lead investors first, and then going really to the masses to try to bring it together, you'll be so much more effective because you already have someone who's vouching for you. And you shouldn't think a lead investor has to write like 20% of your round or anything. It can be a very small amount. A lead investor just has to be your biggest cheerleader, really take a stance. And those are the ones who are taking the risks. They're the ones who, they just do it because they are into it. They're like, yeah, I love the company, I love it. And so finding a lead investor isn't the easiest one, but you have to meet with, like I said, 75 meetings to find 5 people that I didn't even have a meeting with those 5. So, it's not, those are terrible odds. I don't mean to sound like it's tough, but that is, now granted, I will say what we went through was an entirely dry spell. I will say second quarter there was a lot more funding that happened in Austin, but most of it did not happen in that stage, so they were larger rounds. And so you're really following the same industry. So for us to raise any funds at all is impressive nonetheless to do it on a consumer model. But I think going forward, I think people are going to be much more excited to be writing checks because there has been a lot of money made in venture, like twice as much. And so everybody's going to be eager. How they dice that all up will come down to you. But yeah. So
you think the outlook is good?
Yes.
Even though we're facing an election year.
Are you really
Not
wanting
to
me
get
to
you
talk
back
about
on
politics?
the subject of politics. Business.
Yes, I think it is a great time to be a hustler. There's no better time to be out there than right now. I think the next 18 months, especially if you're trying to raise a seed round, is very effective. I think you'll be able to get a lot more appointments than you think. I think people are going to be much more devout to listening. And part of that, it's unfortunate, but if you look over the last 10 years, even though you're in Austin, so I have this all the time, I was shocked to find this out myself, but you think, man, there's startups everywhere. There's so many startups, how do you pick, right? If you look over a historical perspective, we actually start fewer companies than ever in history. The amount of companies being started is diminishing and diminishing and diminishing. It's sad, right? And that even includes lifestyle entrepreneurs. I mean, they're just kind of being weeded out. Now, I haven't looked in, there's a Kauffman Foundation and the US Treasury, the group I was on, the steering committee, they were trying to research to find out, what is it? Is corporate America getting so big that it's there? And I don't know. But you shouldn't think just because you're in Austin, everybody has, the easiest conversation starter is, what's your startup, right? In Austin, but you shouldn't think that's the world around. What you're doing right now is probably actually more unique than you think. Even though I do meet lots of founders who believe it's entirely unique, don't go that far. But not to say it's not, but we shouldn't think like, I started TennaCloud. I didn't think that I'm the only one who has this idea. There's 50 more of us. I do think I'm the only one who's gonna pull it off, right? That's what we have to be pompous like that because we have to wake up every day knowing the world is trying to knock us down. So you have to wake up with excitement. But nonetheless, you shouldn't be over pompous, but you should think that a lot of your competition has just been wiped out over the last 18 months. Unfortunately, I think this is really another point to show you about venture capitalists. A lot of them got fired. So in 2000, if you were to build a bell curve of venture capitalists and the size of the fund that they raise, the traditional size was between 100 million and 300 million. That was the norm, right? When we went through this recession just after 2012, 2013, that inverted. So all these micro funds popped out that were doing 50 million or less. And there were a lot of them. And then all of these billion-dollar funds, Andreessen Horowitz and the rest of them, they were all raising money, but nobody in the middle. So everybody's like, venture has changed, it's all a new world. But then you're starting to see, out of last quarter, the $100 million fund is back. It is the standard. So what really happened is all these other VCs got fired. They didn't raise funds. And you're starting to see the new ones were able to raise the new money. And especially, you're gonna see in the next quarters now that LPs are extremely excited to have any return, and ventures pulling it off by leaps and bounds. They're gonna be pumping in, and you're gonna see it return to about 250 million. And so that is a firing of the old hat and the new, because venture capitalists, that's how they work, right? If you can't raise money, you're no longer a venture capitalist. And so bringing that into the bell curve is important because there's new thought process into venture capital. Because if you looked at the last round, the fact that they didn't invest in the last 18 months, I think is a disappointment. They were not doing their job. It means that they're really not venture capitalists because they're not venturing anywhere. They're basically following markets around and trying to bring in returns, and I think that's unfortunate. By the industry, there's some great firms out there, and Austin has many of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you gave us some positive insight.
Hopefully that was positive.
Yeah, that was positive. All right, so I don't want to dominate all your time. I want to open it up to the audience for questions. So who would like to ask Joe some questions?
Hopefully it's politically driven.
Yes.
Quick question. So you said 18 months is kind of good for Series A and seed round. So what's a good time for a B round in that case? You think B is going to get better after 18 months?
I think B is actually going to find it harder to raise funds. But when I said 18 months, right now to raise a fund, it's about 18 months. And so latest funds that were raised took about 18 months. And you'll find all of these things sort of correlate. Like as long as it took the VC to raise a fund, they now have to think their horizon, so that meets their deployment of capital clock, and so everything's kind of matched. But the B round, as you can see, everybody's flooding this market, and the B round has really turned into almost a private equity fund. And so the exits have been there. And so that's what's crazy is as much as I just told the story about these crazy bets, there are haircuts everywhere. But you're seeing many are actually bringing in positive returns. And so there's a mix of both. All those ones that were overvalued to begin with are just getting knocked down like crazy. So we're gonna see still a lot of haircuts to come. but you're seeing exits go up so well. But both of those mixes means it's gonna be harder in a B round, which if you were to ask anybody in the B round, they say, well, the reason we raised so much money is because we were scared to death of the recession, so we over-raised, which would be almost the exact same thing. So yeah, I think it's gonna be harder for the later ones, and it's gonna be easier for the smaller ones because there's fewer of them, and they know they basically have to invest in the supply, and they really haven't invested in the supply. They basically have all these harvesting companies, and eventually they're gonna go out to harvest, and they're gonna have to do something, and so that's what's gonna bring a nice valuation for the earlier ones because there's fewer of them, and so now they're gonna be fighting for whichever gets deal, which is nice for an entrepreneur because earlier on, basically, I mean, the way it works is your first seed round, you basically, whoever will give me money, I'll take it, yes please, right? And then later you can kind of get picky, but I think it's gonna be in the favor of the entrepreneur earlier on, where you really have to think about what kind of investors do you want. And I mean, it really should be something you do anyways, because there is dumb money, as I well know. I mean, the state and different groups, you don't want an investor that's misaligned, you know? We have one we're talking to now. They're not misaligned, but it's one of their first early startups, and so they were learning how it works, and so they were kind of excited, like, all right, when do I get my return? Like, Monday? It's like, whoa, we should talk. And so there are misalignments that I think go on, and so that one's obviously a strange one, but I do think it's in the favor of the entrepreneur to kind of do that. But yeah, on the B rounds, I mean, it's not gonna be the most one. However, there is still a lot of funding around, and we're seeing a lot of private equity firms pop up. In the 80s, there were 24, I read this article, I think it's 24 private equity firms in the 80s. There's almost 7,000 of them now.
Wow.
So, you can see this industry has changed a lot. An exit really is about M&A. IPOs are rare. In fact, one really good point is that right now we're seeing since 2008, it's the first time that M&A has outvalued an IPO. Which means that's almost the standard. It's like, I mean, we're basically growing companies to sell them, which is disheartening to a sense, but we all have to think how to, you know, navigate this environment. So to see, because it's M&A that hit the $100 million valuation by median. So I don't know if that answered the question or I'm just babbling, but I'm hopefully within that babbling doing something.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have two questions. The first one is, you mentioned that
No.
in today's world, that seed round is now getting close to 4 million. What does that mean as far as going out there and generating the money? Are you going out there and asking for 4 million, or how does that work? And then the second question that I had was, your 75 meetings with all these different angel investors, how did that work out? Did you meet them at cafes? Was it at a certain location, centralized location? If you could talk about that.
I'll answer your second one first because it's more exciting, but if I forget, ask me the first one again. But the second one, I really was ambitious to prove that anyone and everyone could do this. So I did take it in a different level where, in fact, a lot of people came to me after they heard we raised money and they're like, what? Like, I didn't even know. And so I literally went and tried to find people I'd never known, that wouldn't know of me, that I would not really talk about. I'd focus my experience on like what the company was. So it was about, you know, I come from real estate. I would try to sell those kind of things. And so I did do a lot of cold calls. And you will hear everybody in this industry say, you need a warm introduction. And warm introductions are great, but it's really about hustle. I mean, it's sales, right? You're trying to sell something. So find anybody and everybody who will listen to you and sell it to them. And you know, if they buy it, that's great. And maybe they don't buy it, but they tell a friend who buys it, which is exactly how I found some great investors, is going through network people that I had pitched to, and they're like, I think one of them was on a plane. They're not an investor, right? So I think anybody and everybody, but yeah, finding everything. And I always sit down. A face-to-face is so important, a one-on-one. Try not to have too many investors. Like one thing I don't like is when you go to pitches, and CTN, I hope they get away from this, but it's almost like they like to beat up on startups. Like no other startups allowed in the room. You come in and pitch, and I always feel bad. 'Cause, you know, here I am in the audience. I'm like, man, this is awful for this poor founder. And then they just rip them apart. And then they make them leave to rip them apart more in their own little circles. So it's not the greatest, but I do think using those networks to find as many people, have a sit down, talk to them face to face, let them know you. Because the one thing you have to remember about startups is your business plan is going to change. Everything's going to change. I mean, tomorrow my entire market for Cloud could be dead, right? Everything that I've raised on could be dead, but I'm not going to be, hopefully. And that's why you really break down startups are about people. It's a people business. And so if you really want this, in fact, I will tell you a little secret. Hopefully my investors aren't listening, but I don't think they'd mind either. Guess how many, now we put a lot of money, right? I wrote a lot of money. So we had like $1.4 million into Tenant Cloud software. And I still don't take a salary. So I will say also in our Tenant Cloud culture, I am the lowest paid person. I do believe that. That's really started from John Mackey here at Whole Foods, and he devoutly said, I take $1. And I kind of believe in the same thing. I think I'm only going to do what, or I'm going to live what I preach. And so I'm the lowest paid person, which right now happens to be 0. But we put a lot of money into the system. So if you were to check out the system, I think you would appreciate it, right? Because we put a lot of money into it. None of them even looked at, none of them gave it a test drive, I swear to you. So it's a balance when you go to raise fund and talk to them. It's really about you. It's more about you than you would ever think. And it's about telling your personal experience. It's about talking about, like, why do you do this? Why is it tomorrow when every investor tells you you're a moron, you'll never succeed at anything? Why are you gonna wake up tomorrow and be a badass? I mean, that is really important. And if you can give that story to someone, they're basically betting on you. And so it's not really about your company, because your company's going to change. You're going to pivot. You're going to have business plans, things that change. All of those are going to change. And so you gotta wake up tomorrow. So you gotta find someone who believes in you. And one that's, you know, it's not the easiest challenge to find, but once you do, it's great to find those relations, they stick. Now your other one was about terms.
I think I know the answer to that question already.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Nice.
All right, anybody else? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about building your 4 pillars for Tenant Cloud before investing, about building your team, building product?
Yes, great question. That's really what sent me on the trip, right? Because I was like, all right, here I am. I think I'm $1 million guy, so I think I checked that box to claim a $4 million valuation. So I'm like, all right, I have me, but I don't have the rest of my staff. I don't have the rest of the people to help me grow this. They're gonna hate that I just called staff. I avoid saying that in all our meetings. Yeah, I just said it. So I kind of had the vision, right? Then it's like, all right, I looked at the market. I researched the market really well. I was like, I'm pretty spot on in the market. In fact, the market was half of what I just told you. That's only the latest information that came out at the end of September. So it ended up being twice as big as we ever thought. So the original market we went after was much smaller that we were focusing. But I'm like, all right, I've narrowed the market down. We've done that. I don't have a product at all, right? And I don't have a go-to-market strategy for that product at all. And so that's what sent me out saying, I'm not gonna reinvent the wheel. Because here I was, now I'm a little different, and I will say every entrepreneur needs to do this. It's important anywhere. Everything I've done, everything I've gotten to, I've made this decision. Like, I'm gonna do this. And so I gotta make sure that I have really taken care of me to be able to do that. Because the worst thing you have is when you like go out to something, but then you're trying to keep your personal life together while also build something that's gonna be huge, right? So on my personal front, I mean, I have 4 kids, my wife. I can't just leave them hanging, and I'm gonna do, now my wife is used to me being crazy. And so I think that's something that I don't even know how she deals with it myself. But I do go off on whims, and like I tell her, like, hey, I think I'm gonna go help the government and make like no money. She's like, oh, interesting. I'm gonna start a nonprofit and basically not get paid. So if you ask her, she'll tell you I have many ideas that basically bring in no money. And I have lots of them. But I do think that's important, is that you financially have to build something up to make sure you can last the bandwidth. Because the last thing you want to have is like your will is there, but your resources were dried up. And I think that's terrible, and I think sometimes that gets exploited in small extents by investors. But so you have to make sure that's all prepared. So when I came to the table a little different than others, I was like ready to write a check. So I was ready to put some money in. So my first check was gonna be $500,000. That's not very normal, right? So I wasn't gonna reinvent the wheel. I could have just said, I'm gonna build a team, I'm gonna get this. But I'm like, well, I wanna get to market as fast as I can, I wanna fill these pillars. So that's what brought me to Chicago. I basically was interviewing people to say, all right, how can we build this together? And so for them, it was like, all right, you have the core system, you already have this, they had already put a lot to it. In fact, originally it was like, all right, we're basically gonna lay off everybody in Chicago, and it's all gonna be Austin. And then about 2 months into it, I'm just like, I cannot believe where you found these people. And we had people who were they were just devoutly dedicated to this mission and goal and reinvented, and they have stayed with us this whole time. And so we ended up keeping them all, and they are, it's more than culture, it's more than a company. I mean, these people are devout Tenant Cloud believers. And so I love that. So when I tell anybody, I was like, because I get asked the question like, hey, how do I get into startups or something? And I was like, you just start it. I mean, not everybody needs to be a founder. Not everybody needs to be a CFO. If you think you are a proven hustler, find a company. If you can benefit them, just show up and say, hey, I'm your new CFO. And trust me, most founders will first be like, what? And then you keep hassling saying, hey, I'm doing this. But I will tell you right now, if you can benefit my company, I will raise money just to keep you. That's how life is for startups. I mean, so it is about these people, it is about growing. And so when we found that helped me fill a lot of those portions. And so what we had to build out next was demand, that market. And so at the time, Eva Property had 350 users, one paying $40 a month. And that was, that was the company. And they were all like, why isn't it working? And none of them had anything to do with property management. So they had a lot to do with software, but they basically said, oh, you have a need, I'll build this thing for you. And it wasn't extremely functional, but they were all like wanted to do it. And so once, you come in and everybody plays their role. And so when we have company meetings, I am honestly the lowest person on the totem pole, right? What is my job? My job is basically overall a loser, right? My job is to make sure they stay funded, to make sure they are building something amazing. I'll try to bring vision. I try to keep them excited. I try to be like a cheerleader captain or something, but I'm not the one really doing it. Like they are, and they are doing amazing. There's like 30 of them now. So we have about 30 people in the company, which we just brought on. So it's growing fast, but they're the ones, doing this production. And so when it came to the demand side, before I could go out and raise a seed, I knew I had to build up that fourth pillar, which was show that there is an actual traction out there, an actual demand. And so when we did it, we had to put together a plan saying, okay, well, we have to focus on one thing, but it's not gonna actually be the most effective thing, but I know I have to fill out a pillar. So we deployed a strategy that left us with a very low marketing budget. So to get all those users, to get in that competition, we actually didn't have much of a marketing budget. So most of that was for development. So we really had to get bootstrapped. And so I think, I don't know how many social followers, but unfortunately, investors look to that to mean something. I don't think it really means anything. But they were very effective, is not to any credit of mine. So the team was very effective. We brought in a couple of new people, and one, I always say, if you find someone who can really knock it out of the park, especially if they come to you, raise money, do whatever you can to get them, because that's really your next growth. It has nothing to do with you. But everybody's a hustler, so to think that you have to be a hustler, so I have to start a company, that's so misguided. I think that's unfortunate. So when people talk like, how I want to get started, it's like, well, just find a company and do it. Every company is looking for you, and unfortunately, the bigger they get, the less vision they have, and so they stop being innovative, and they have to start buying innovation, which is nice for us too, because we need to sell it to somebody, I guess. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, or I'm still just babbling. I think we've given the time signal, so
Yeah.
I believe it with babbling.
All right, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for being
My
here with
pleasure.
us tonight. This was awesome.